to The Green Rush, a podcast about the intersection of cannabis, the capital markets, and culture. On a weekly basis, hosts Ann Donahoe and Louis Goldberg of KCSA Strategic Communications speak with the business leaders, financial experts, cultural icons, legislators, and generally interesting people moving the cannabis industry forward. In this week's episode, Louis and Ann are diving into compliance, and joining them is Marion Mariathasan, the co-founder and CEO of Denver-based company Simplifya, which gives businesses the power to delegate, review, and proactively manage legal compliance tasks across all facility and license types. In addition to chatting about how Simplifya is able to decode complex regulations on a state-by-state level, Ann and Louis also cover the company's recent hire of John Vardaman, one of the authors of the Cole Memo, as well as Marion's incredibly unique entrepreneurial journey, including his Sri Lankan royal background. So don't sit back, lean forward. Now on to our interview with Louis, Ann, and Marion.
Hey, Ann.
Hi, Louis.
Boy, that is, every time I start off with the, hey, Ann, I feel like a total, fraud of some kind.
A fraud? You don't
yeah,
just
a fraud.
Sound dopey?
I do, well, not as bad as I sounded on the intro to the 100th episode that we just
It was
published.
very sweet. I just listened to it. I'm about halfway through. I was bummed I couldn't be there, but it was very sweet.
But I did the Joe Rogan, hello, friends. And it's because I keep listening to him because he's so freaking good.
Well, I've been wanting to do the John Oliver, welcome, 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 but I've refrained.
Oh, you got to do that.
No,
oh my
it's
God.
not my thing.
Well, you know what?
I'm not ripping it
You know
off.
what? Now, totally. We are now totally going to rip off everybody's intro. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Just time for one quick thing. Oh my God, I love that. That's really funny. I think that should be our shtick. Now we have 100 plus
out.
episodes in, stealing other people's intros, and doing them worse.
Yeah, because that's what the people want to hear.
Well, they want to hear you. They don't. By the way, it's time for you to do your own episode, not a no more just Louis specials. We need to do an Ann solo show.
Okay. Well, that's not today. Today
That is not today.
We
Go ahead.
had a great conversation. Had or are having. I forget what tense I'm in right now, but time is a flat circle in podcast world. So we are talking to the co-founder and CEO of Simplifya, a gentleman by the name of Marion Mariathasan.
Well done.
Yes. Who is making compliance sexy again.
What do you mean again?
It had its moment.
Sexy?
It had its moment. It was brief. I can't think of when that moment was, but I'm giving it its
Tuesday,
props.
Tuesday, July 7th, 1942.
Right.
That was when it was. That's when it was sexy.
It's now sexy again.
Oh well. All right. As bad as this intro was for the two of us, the actual
The interview
conversation
gets much better. I promise.
The interview is way better, way better. So with that, on to our conversation with Marion Mariathasan. I'm sorry, Marion. I'm so sorry.
That was not right.
It was so wrong, and he was such a good guy. But now on to our interview with the CEO of Simplifya. Marion, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with Ann and me today. We have been looking forward to this for a while now.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show, and it's great to be here.
So Simplifya is a great name, and it's all about simple. But most people don't know who you are and what you do. So who are you and what do you do?
So Simplifya, we have a joke internally that we're like the least sexiest company in the cannabis space. And primarily just because of what we do. And what we do is we are the leading regulatory and operational compliance company. Now, what does that mean? So we take all the cumbersome state and local regulations, as the name of the company implies, we simplify it down into literally a 12th grade reading level. And we have them as audit questions within our software so that any license holder can use it to make sure that they're staying within the boundaries of the law from a regulatory perspective. That's just one kind of aspect of what Simplifya does. So if you're a license holder, you essentially would sign up, and based on your location, so if you're in Denver, Colorado, and say you have a recreational and a medical license, the system automatically detects where you are and the types of license you have, and it'll generate a list of audit questions that essentially walks you through all the regulations that you can answer through a yes or no scenario. And at the end of it, the system will give you a report that says, here is where you are compliant and here's where you're not compliant. And where you're not compliant, the system actually gives you action items as to how to rectify those areas of non-compliance. And then take it one step further, and where you can assign it out. If you're a compliance officer or a manager or an owner of a facility, you can assign it out to employees. And when they actually fix those areas of non-compliance, then it's date stamped, time stamped, and name stamped. So it's, what we say at Simplifya is like your most valuable asset if you're a license holder is your license. And so we help you preserve that license. We help you manage your entire kind of regulatory and operational compliance within one system. And that in a kind of high level is what we do. But, we've got a bunch of other stuff now that we've entered into, including SOPs, where we extrapolate standard operating procedures from state and local regs. We have what's called a smart cabinet that tells you, it's kind of like compliance for dummies, that tells you exactly what you need to do in terms of, paperwork for your license or your application paperwork, when it needs to be done, and so forth. So yeah, that in a nutshell is what we do.
Marion, perhaps no other industry, maybe other than, alcohol or tobacco, is so heavily regulated and regulated to like the nth degree. How do you guys keep up with such a dynamic industry and make sure that, everything you have is absolutely up to speed and correct? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. So, even though we're a tech company, we have a group of folks called the Regulatory Affairs team. The Regulatory Affairs team consisted of policy folks and lawyers. And literally all they do is sit and pour through regulations, again, on a state and local level, but they're also monitoring all the regulations in the states that we're in. So we're in 16 states now. And because, as you know, they are changing on an ongoing basis. And so on a real-time basis, when regulations change, they actually take those regulations and as I mentioned earlier, they simplify it down and put it into the system. So it's really grueling work and it's really hard work, but someone.
So do you supply free coffee for all those guys and gals?
free coffee and tequila? No, just coffee. It's what they do is incredibly hard, and so that's part of the reason I think that there's. And very little competition or any competition to Simplifya because of the fact of the work that we do.
You guys, sit in this unique space, right? You're like you said, you're regulatory and you are a technology company. There has been a lot of discussion about how artificial intelligence is going to play a role in regulatory oversight. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so on the AI perspective, it's essentially taking data that you have and the system, becomes smarter over time based on how people are answering questions and how the industry as a whole is dealing with compliance, right? So AI, I think, is not just an exciting topic for the cannabis industry. I think it is across all different industries. But as of right now, what I can tell you is AI, as great as it is, it still can't do the type of work a team like our regulatory affairs team has to do, right? Because you still are dealing with ongoing changes in regulations, whether it's state or local, and to be able to understand that, to interpret it, but also to be able to convert them into a yes or no question without losing its meaning is something that I think AI still hasn't gotten around to, but I think eventually it will help with license holders down the road. But as of right now, it's not really there.
The cannabis industry has seen this incredible influx of investment capital, and then it's slowed down recently. You guys sit between that, like I said, this, like you're somewhere between a cannabis company and a tech company, maybe even a fintech company. You're in the middle of a raise right now. Do you want to talk about the type of reception that investors are giving you and how you describe your value proposition? Have you had to change your pitch given what's been going on with cannabis valuations?
So that's a great question. I think with the markets kind of not doing so hot, I think investors are a little shy about obviously investments into the space. But we've been very fortunate in that we have a really good group of investors. We've raised 7.3 so far.
That's million, not $7.3.
Yes, 7.3 million, and we're raising 4 million in our Series D. And as a matter of fact, yesterday around 2:30 is when I finally finished up our Series D deck and financials, and I sent it out to our existing shareholders. And I was literally having this conversation earlier today, and I think it's fun to kind of share. I sent that deck out, and mind you, to the minute, 6 minutes later, one of our existing shareholders wrote back and said, "I'll take $500,000." And then just this morning, I had another gentleman that called me and said, "I want $500,000." And we've got, Merida Capital has been just a wonderful group to be working with, and Mitch and Merida have been obviously very supportive of us, and they already committed to coming in on this round. But we have a new lead, a potential new lead that we're speaking to as well. And we have 99% of our investors, existing investors, that are re-upping on this round. So we've been very fortunate. And I think part of that's due to the fact that, Simplify is a reg tech company, right? So, not only are we working with the license holders, we now have started servicing financial institutions as well as insurance companies, delivery companies. We have conversations going on with government on the local municipality level. So, as I said earlier on in this call, that even though we were the least sexiest, all of a sudden it turns out that compliance is a must in a highly regulated industry, and so here we are.
But definitely a Justin Timberlake joke in there somewhere, bringing compliance sexiness back. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you one of my favorite quotes that I still use was given to me by Christian Cederberg when I first got into the space about 3.5 years ago. And Christian Cederberg's with Vicente Cederberg, and he said, "Marion, people think that they're getting into the cannabis industry when in fact they're getting into the compliance industry. If they do compliance really well, they get to stay in cannabis and run cannabis, right?" And I thought that was such a great quote, and I use it every day because it's so true. Because if you're not compliant, it's like any other highly regulated industry, whether it's alcohol or gaming or whatever it may be, pharma. If you're not playing by the rules, then you're not playing any longer. And so that's where we fit into that ecosystem.
Can we back up a little bit and talk about maybe how you got into the space? You're a serial entrepreneur, and what attracted you. I was going to say to the cannabis industry, but maybe I should say to the compliance industry.
Yeah, so this goes back actually to Vicente Cederberg again. And prior to that, so I come from the tech space. So I've been fortunate to have started and built and sold a handful of tech companies. And then prior to getting into cannabis, I used to own a tequila company. And so I came
samples. Just kidding.
I came from a highly regulated space prior, but it actually
to an even more highly regulated space.
Yes, exactly. And it has to do with Vicente Cederberg again. Christian Cederberg is actually a close family friend of my wife's family, and they're all like third or fourth generation Coloradans, and I've been in Colorado for 17 years. I ran into Christian at a few different kind of functions or events, and Christian was like, "Hey, this is not just going to be a Colorado thing. This is going to be a global thing." And he's like, "You really should look into this more." And he's like, "As a matter of fact, we have an idea for a compliance play," which obviously is when he told me about whole compliance for, in cannabis and so forth. And he said, you should really come in and chat with us. And so I went in, and they were talking about what was to become Simplify, a way to create a software product that can scale, not just nationally, but on a global level. And, that would keep these license holders in check in terms of, not losing their license. And so that was really the turning point for me. To me, compliance made a lot of sense. Technology made a lot of sense. Scaling a business in this space made a lot of sense. And so I was one of the first investors in the company. And that's how I got into the space.
And you don't touch the plant. So is that something that, was the space you were interested in it, but not in a plant touching sense, and this just made sense, or you came at it from a purely technology side and figured this is a great way to get in?
Yeah. So, because I understood tech, it was an easy kind of a draw towards compliance tech or reg tech. But early on, I certainly didn't want to touch the plant just because I wasn't quite sure, exactly where the road would lead. And, and you had to go through a lot of paperwork to get into investments where you're touching the plant. Now, of course, I've made about 14 investments in various companies myself, and there are 2 that actually touch the plant. So I've gotten comfortable with it over the few years, but it just made sense early on to get into compliance just because of the tech aspect and the compliance factor of it.
We are, to remind everybody, talking with Marion. I'm not going to try and pronounce your name. I know you gave it to me before, but why don't you tell me how to pronounce your name again, please, so that everybody can get it right.
No worries. It's Marion Mariathasan. It's a tongue twister.
The CEO of Simplifya, and you're from Sri Lanka.
I am.
Which is relatively unique in the cannabis industry. Is there, or what is the history of cannabis and Sri Lanka? And when you got into the industry, what did your community think?
That's an interesting question, right? So Sri Lanka, which is a primarily conservative Buddhist country, has actually been using cannabis from an Ayurvedic medicinal standpoint for, very, very long time. But when it comes to the recreational or consumable side of it, for just recreational purposes, the country shies away very heavily. So I'm Catholic, but or was raised Catholic, and my family, of course, initially was a little skeptical, but they embraced it pretty quickly. But I go to Sri Lanka twice a year because I have a company there as well, a software company, and it's pretty amazing that Sri Lanka, even though it's coming around to it, there's still that stigma that if you're in cannabis, they just think you're sitting around smoking a joint, 24 hours a day. And,
you're not?
Hey, I have no issue with that, but I certainly wouldn't be able to function or run a company if I was, because as much as I like it, it's like I wouldn't be able to stay focused, I think. But so I think just like the rest of the world that, that probably still carries some stigma around cannabis, they're embracing it slowly, but not as quickly as we have here. And even I think here in the States, even you still have people that are still against it. So.
You guys recently announced the hiring of John Vardaman, who is one of the co-authors of the Cole Memo, which has been such an integral document in the evolution of this industry. How did that come about? I mean, he's certainly someone who's been on, both sides of the cannabis aisle, so to speak. What does he do for you guys?
So John is our Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel, and you're right. And so he, was with the DOJ, Treasury, and he, was the author of the Cole Memorandum. After that, he actually went to work for a sister company of ours, Hyper, which is in the fintech side in the cannabis space. But I think, with the Safe Banking Act coming along, and hopefully we'll pass the Senate, because of the fact that Simplify was also getting into the financial institution side of the business, because Hyper is still a very close sister company, we kind of came to the terms like, hey, Hyper, you've had him for a few years. Now we get to have him, and to help us kind of spearhead the financial institution side of things for us. And so that's how he came on board with us. And John's a phenomenal guy, has a lot of deep knowledge when it comes to obviously the regulatory side of things, but also compliance and banking. And so very fortunate.
So just between us chickens, have you spoken to him about Jeff Sessions and what his thinking was when he I'm going to repeal the Cole memorandum?
That's funny. I actually haven't had that conversation with him. I guess I kind of blocked it out of my head after Sessions said that. But I'll get back to you on that. I'll certainly ask him and report back.
Rumor has it, going back to Sri Lanka for a moment, that you are literally the king of cannabis. Can you talk a little bit about your royal background?
Well, yeah. So my mother, actually, her father comes from. There's a book called The Golden Book of Ceylon, and my mother is the great granddaughter of the northern part of the king of Sri Lanka, and so it's funny you asked that. I guess you guys have done some research, but yeah. So it's
you're the first royal we've talked to, so we're pretty excited.
Well, it's something that we actually don't talk about too often in our family because my mom is a super modest lady, and even when she hasn't gone back to Sri Lanka since 1990, I think, or 92.
Oh. Is she in Colorado with you?
Yes, she is. Both of my parents are, and so even when we go back, when people, even though she's now identified by her married name, when they find out her maiden name, there's a little bit of extra treatment that she gets, but she's super shy about it. And already you have a country that's really dominated by what do you call classes, if you will, yeah. and so which she doesn't prescribe into, and neither do I. And so we just joke that it's kind of dead and gone, but yeah, it's certainly part of our lineage, I guess. That bit of history.
And what is it like, from a cultural point of view to move from such a, you said you've been in the U.S. for 17 years or Colorado for 17 years?
So I've been in Colorado for 17 years. My family actually immigrated straight to Kansas. Yeah.
because everybody grows up wanting to move to Kansas.
So just to make it even more twisted of a story, my father was in politics in Sri Lanka, and I don't know how much you know about the civil war that actually just ended in the 90s, but right at the height of the civil war was in 83 when we moved to the States. My dad's kind of running partner got assassinated, and we were also kind of in the line of fire, I suppose. That's the way. So wait.
So the Tamil Tigers were coming after you directly?
No, so it's a little bit more complex. So so I'm Tamil. My dad's side of the family is from the northern part of the island, but my parents were always of the mind that we're Sri Lankan. It's not so much that you're Sinhalese or Tamil or Muslim. It's just we're Sri Lankan, right? And his kind of running mate or his co-runner in this kind of new movement had the same ideology, and of course he got assassinated. And so anyone that was trying to spread this idea of like, hey, we're one, was not really liked at that point by some extreme sides. And so we had to get out of the country very quickly, and we knew two people in the entire U.S. One was in D.C., my mom's older brother, and one was in Kansas, my mom's younger brother. And I guess my parents thought that cost of living was cheaper in Kansas, and Kansas was a better place to raise kids. And so we ended up in a small town in Kansas. And so from a tropical island to Kansas in the dead of winter. Great.
And so you went from a tropical island to Kansas, which is flat and cold, to Colorado, which is mountainous and cold.
Yeah.
There was a point in your career that you looked at the cannabis industry and said, I want to be in that. Like there is a hole that I can fill. Can you talk about that? Did you have a gestalt moment where like this light bulb went off and said, everything I have done in my career has brought me to this?
Yeah. So, I was on the outside looking in, and, I think the industry was just starting up in some sense. And I felt like I had some value that I can add, at least from a tech perspective, and having done startups, right? And again, looking from the outside and looking in, I was just like, wow, there's all these great opportunities because it's completely new. And I wasn't quite sure how and where and how I was going to do it, I suppose. But so, having that conversation with Christian Cederberg was very serendipitous at that time because, I think what I realized very quickly was that compliance, whether people like it or not, in a highly regulated space was going to be a necessity. And then when you couple that up with technology that can scale, not just nationally, on a global level, it made a ton of sense. And so when I had that opportunity to jump in with Simplify, I dove in head first because it was, how often do we get a chance to be kind of on the forefront of an emerging industry, right? And so it was just super fun. And I still love it to this day.
The first sales call that you made, can you talk about who you went to and what that experience was like?
So, it took us much longer to get to the point where we could actually sell. What we initially did was where we went for beta customers, meaning we wanted to work with dispensaries and cultivators and manufacturers and trying to understand what their pain points were from a compliance perspective. So, it was a group here in Denver, and we called and said, hey, luckily Vicente Cederberg made an introduction. We're like, hey, we're the new compliance guys on the block, and guys and girls, I guess, and we'd like to pick your brain around what you like and what you don't like about what you're doing on a manual basis around regulatory and operational compliance. And they were super, helpful. They were very talkative. They had a ton of things they wanted to tell us, like that they hated, right? And how to stay on top of the ever-changing regulations. And so that was the first call. And it was so insightful because I certainly didn't come from a compliance background or a legal background. And so it was just so insightful and so exciting and so nerve-wracking all at the same time because, we were embarking on something that, myself or the team had ever done before.
And what year was that?
So we actually incorporated Simplify in March 2016. We started building what we call an alpha product, and we officially launched December or November of 2016 with just a very basic product that we started talking to our alpha customers with.
And did you see, I feel cannabis is such, has historically been a very off the books business. Almost begging for better technology to manage not only their compliance, but their seed to sale. And, there is such a place for technology in this industry. Did you sense any initial reluctance with some of your initial customers?
Yes, very much so. That's a great question, Anna. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, it's been in the background, right? I mean, cannabis itself has kind of been in the background, and a lot of these, not a lot, but some of the operators that we were talking to are very reluctant to just trust any new people coming into the space. They're like, hey, we've been in on the ground level, going through all this hardship and trying to get, deregulation to come around. And all of a sudden these people are showing up that we don't even know, can we trust you? Are you guys going to be around long enough? Are you going to really have my interest in hand here? And so there was quite a bit of pushback early on until, now it's completely different because we've been around for 3 years or coming up on 3 years. And, we've kind of shown our value in terms of what we bring to these license holders. And so it's very different now, but early on it absolutely was. I think they just didn't want to deal with techies and non-cannabis people that were just all of a sudden showing up in their vertical.
Technology breaks, and I assume that you were on version 38.2.7 of what you guys are doing, right?
Yeah.
And every time you especially for technology company, you issue a new iteration, your idea is to get better, to learn from your mistakes. What can you talk about those mistakes?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, my entire career has been a bunch of fuck ups.
And by the way, welcome to the podcast. You can fucking curse all you want.
Well, I heard you say that. I was like, oh, I can cuss on this one. That's great. No, but so here's the thing, right? So as techies and people that really didn't come from the industry, we took the luxury or the liberty of making some assumptions, right, in our product. It's like, oh, okay, well, we went and asked these questions, and sometimes you just can't in one sitting ask all the questions you want. So we would kind of form some opinions and assumptions, as you do, oftentimes. But in other industries that we knew really well, you can make assumptions because you know it. Here it was a completely different ball game. And so we had made some assumptions, right? So we had created some technology or features that were like, oh, okay, here's the right natural way to do this. And then we would take it out to the client base and they're like, what the hell is this? Like, no, this is completely wrong because it needs to work this way in a completely different way than we as technologists were thinking about it. And so we had, truth be told, we had probably a couple of years of just lots of ups and downs. We would release a new product that we were like so proud of. And then, cannabis business would come and say like, this really sucks. You guys really screwed this one, right? And so that happened for a couple of years. But that's the beauty of technology. It's, as you mentioned, it's like you learn from your mistakes. You get smarter as we get better with the industry as a whole. And where we are today is it's completely night and day than where we were a few years ago. As a matter of fact, there was a customer in here 2 days ago that we had pitched 2 years ago, and they were just like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And then we had them back in here 2 days ago, and they're like, wow, this is like, yes, sign us up, like literally on the spot. They're like, it's completely different. And we're like, yeah, they're like, you guys have really evolved. And we're like, absolutely. We learned from a lot of dumb things that we did and assumptions and mistakes we made, and here we are. But going back to my career, oh my gosh, from failures to successes, you learn, right? You constantly are learning, and I've certainly have fucked up along the way plenty of times, and I suspect I will continue to do.
Well, if you don't, then you're not trying, right? I mean, I think that's the thing with any entrepreneur at any level. Effort. If you are not trying to do and push the envelope, then you're not trying to grow and progress. And that's failure is a function of success, and success is a function of failure. And by the way, that was a great answer. It is rare. We've had now more than 100 guests on, and we've probably asked this question 50 times. And to my knowledge, I would say that 3 or 4 people have been truly authentic about their conversations of failure. And for the people who are listening, we really want to know, like, where did you screw up, and how did it impact on you? Because we all fuck up. Like every day I make mistakes and I try and not duplicate them, and it has informed the success of my company, my relationships, everything. So I really appreciate you being honest.
Yeah, no, I think, the way we grow as individuals or even companies is by recognizing our failures, right? And I think even today, even though we've, as a company in Simplify, or even any of these other companies I'm involved in, one of the things we always literally promote is like, it's okay to come and say, I screwed this up, because if we know, then we can try and fix it and learn from it, right? But if you try and hide it or try and deny it, or even to ourselves as an individual, if I'm just, reluctant to admit fault, then, I'm just going to be sitting there in the same spot thinking I'm like some amazing person, which I'm not. And it's funny how that works.
I have to imagine that there are times that you're giving your clients and companies you work with some bad news sometimes. Have there been any companies that have flat out ignored you and just said, "Yeah, I might be not in compliance here, but I'm just gonna forge ahead"? And you see it and you're like, "Oh man, they're gonna make a mistake."
Yeah, so I'll tell you one of the things that people, well, I can't say this on a broad base, but early on, one of the things we noticed was that compliance is literally one of the last things people were thinking about. I think they were thinking about it when they're, filling out their applications and then they're getting started. But when you saw, like here in Colorado, enforcement wasn't happening as much, we literally had people say like, "Oh, I can't remember the last time the Met came in." So like, we're not too worried about it. And so our response to that is just like, wow, like you've spent all this time and money and energy going and winning this license, and you're literally willing to, take that risk by saying, risk it all. And, and then I think, we saw a few years ago, even last year, a few dispensaries that, got handed down some massive fines and even shut down where the licenses were revoked. And I think that's when I think people really start to wake up, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like even advertising, there's certain regulations around advertising. And I think without naming names, I remember one that got hit with a massive fine because they weren't adhering to advertising regulations. It's just like, wow, to us, it's like now that we live and breathe compliance, we're almost like bankers and insurance people. We're just like freaking out about everything. But I think that's what everyone should be thinking about is, how do I preserve this business and how do I grow it? And obviously growing the business is something that they know how to do, but preserving that license and preserving that business is something that we want to be able to help with.
Before we get to our last question, I want to just dig a little bit more into your offering, one of your offerings in Ceylon Solutions. I hope I'm saying that the right way, and how you use it to work with cannabis companies. It's not your typical coding shop. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Ceylon Solutions is a company I've had since 2005. We've done work for Fortune 1,000 companies all the way down to startups in various verticals. But because I'm now spending literally all my time in cannabis, and one of my business partners, Alan Bankier, actually bought into Ceylon Solutions last year, but he's also an investor in Simplifya, we decided to pivot the company to focus entirely on cannabis software development. And so why that's important is, while you have, I think, tech geniuses all around the world that can code products of any sort, I think having software engineers that understand a vertical makes a big difference, right? For the reasons we were talking about earlier. Like when I came from traditional medical software or tequila and coming into cannabis, there was so much of a learning curve I had to learn about, from terminology and to even nuances about how the industry works. So same reason when we pivoted Ceylon Solutions to work directly in the cannabis space, our software engineers now have developed not only Simplifya, but they are the ones that are developing a product called LeafWire. They do development for New Frontier Data, another data company called Zephyr. So they understand what this industry is about. So when you go to an engineer and say, hey, I want you to build this product, but here's the vertical that you're building it in, they actually have a more holistic idea about how the industry operates. And so that's kind of the difference between Ceylon Solutions and just going out and getting any other software developer, because we understand the space. We've been in it now for 3-4 years is when we pivoted the company. And so it makes a big difference, I think. And as a tech guy, I can tell you that if you understand your product and your audience and the vertical, then you can develop much better products than if you don't.
How many companies are you involved with right now? You personally?
Yeah, so as an investor, 14. But I run Simplifya, obviously, as a CEO. That's my full-time gig. I'm the chairman of Ceylon Solutions. I'm on the board of LeafWire. And then on the advisory board of a fund called Key Investment Partners, which is a cannabis fund, and then the rest are just investments.
And when do you sleep?
So ever since even I think college, I've required about maybe 5 hours of sleep. I now have a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. On top of that, I was late into the parenting game,
God.
so I now average about 4.5 hours of sleep. So I've knocked it down by 30 minutes a night, and but I have a lot of energy, so I tend to.
We didn't notice. We didn't notice that at all. So our last question, Marion, we try to ask all of our guests, which is, you read the Denver Post, you read the Wall Street Journal, you're reading MJ Biz. If there's one story that you think is so grossly underreported in cannabis, what is the media missing right now? If you woke up and you saw this, whatever this headline is, you'd be like, finally, they got it right. What's the thing that everybody is missing about the cannabis industry?
Well, I think there's not enough light being shed on the fact that you have some early people that have been in this space just really grinding it out, trying to bring it to legalization, right? I'm now enjoying being in this vertical, being in cannabis, because of the shoulders of some people that were there early on, that lobbied and protested and did all the hard work. That I think one thing I'd like to see is more recognition. I'm certainly not one of these people because I came late to the game, but I think one of the things I'd love to see is people still giving some kudos to those early adopters or those people that were in early on, paving the way for all of us that are now in this space. So that certainly is one. And then I think the other aspect is that, from the investment side, I think there's a lot of excitement about the space, but, I think it's time that people really step up if they want to see the space in terms of companies really catapulting to the next level, right? Because I think we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of shyness now because of the markets, but we need capital in this space if we're going to see it progress. And so, yeah.
That was amazing. Marion, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. If people want to find you, where can they find you on social media? Where can they find you online? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so simplifya.com, simplifya.com, or CeylonSolutions.com, that's CEYLON, and the word solutions.com. But also I'm on LinkedIn. With that crazy name of mine, you can find me pretty easily. It's Marion Mariathasan. And I certainly appreciate you guys taking the time. I've certainly enjoyed it.
So have we.
And I love the laughs. I like that you guys keep it really light.
Well, the goal is for people to I mean, what you are doing is not easily accessible, right? Compliance technology could be something that, people kind of roll their eyes at, but it's vital. And having people understand the role that you guys play in making sure that what's going on in the industry is always on the up and up. That's an important. You are a vital and important piece of the overall cannabis industry, and we may make this conversational, but what you are doing is way important.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I would argue the same thing for you guys, right? I mean, without a medium such as yourself, we wouldn't be able to, kind of talk about our experiences and get the opportunity to share.
Go on.
No, you guys really are awesome. I appreciate the time, and like I said, I love it when people keep things light, and you've certainly made me laugh a few times on this podcast. So
yeah, don't encourage me because the dad jokes will keep coming.
We're really not encouraging the laughing at Lewis.
Well, no, you can laugh at me. You just can't laugh with me.
Yeah. Much easier to laugh at you.
Yes. All right, Marion.
Thank you so much, Marion. It's been
a
pleasure.
I really appreciate the time.
Our thanks to Marion Mariathasan, co-founder and CEO of Simplifya. Check them out at simplifya.com. That's SIMPLIFYA.com. ya.com. As always, if you want to chat with us, you can find us on Twitter with the handle at @the_greenrush or on Instagram at @thegreenrush_podcast. Drop Lewis hate mail at greenrush@kcsa.com. And don't forget to subscribe to The Green Rush in your favorite podcatcher. One take, Shay. One take.